Yes, so first of all, thank you very much for making me a part of this panel, and very pleased to be virtually sitting next to the distinguished panelists. And I thank also the organizers for this great event. I was supposed to be in Ukraine as of last week. On the 11th, I had a train from Warsaw to Kiev for my third mission since June. But the bombings, the shellings on the 10th of October, especially in Kiev, changed the security situation dramatically, and I couldn't go. So I'm joining the event from Geneva today. I think I can take over and share my screen so that I can control the slides. So if you allow me, that will be, I think, easier. Okay. Yes. Apologies for that. I hope you can see my screen. Yes. Well, first of all, as we all know, the war is inherently destructive. And when you look at the past examples of the environmental assessments of armed conflict, it has been seen that the damage on the environment is really devastating on natural resources, on vital ecosystems, as well as the health, livelihoods, and the security of the people exposed to the conflict. And environmental impacts related work, which we can group under containment, mitigation, or remediation efforts, has to be an integrated part of both response and also the recovery actions. With reference to the past examples or the experiences of conflict or post-conflict related environmental assessments, when we look at the preliminary findings of the Ukraine conflict, it's extremely serious, very diverse, very much geographically spread, and not only in the east of the country that suffers most, but also in the central and western parts, which are indirectly affected by the war. I'm not going to read all of those. These are like, let's say, the preliminary findings, but it changes from scorched earth to mines in the forest areas, from soil contamination to destroyed wetlands, from dead dolphins due to sonar sounds to nuclear pollution risks. Additionally, the high risk of exposure of people is quite crucial, especially children, when they're exposed to toxic remnants of war, the chemical materials from bombs and destroyed industrial facilities, or other kinds of hazardous chemicals. This is really of utmost importance. Additional pressure is coming from the internally displaced people moving from the east to the western parts, sometimes causing 40 to 50% increase in local populations. That has a huge impact on basic services of the host communities, impacts on natural areas where they use the summer houses. So that makes the picture even more complex. And of course, there are challenges when you try to do the assessments, because to inform the future assessments, hopefully post-conflict assessments in the near future, hopefully, there's a need for comprehensive and extensive field assessments because we need to determine the character, the scale, and the significance of the impacts, environmental impacts, and also the remediation requirements. It's crucial to feed the recovery efforts to ensure an environmentally sustainable reconstruction when the time comes. Such assessments will require, of course, at first, remote sensing or satellite imagery, which then has to be matched with extensive ground truthing, which additionally requires sampling and analysis. And this needs to also take place in the areas that are inaccessible now due to the ongoing clashes. Also, the challenges go beyond the current, let's say, status. The assessment work has to cover a wide range of issues that will include the impacts on nature, on the human-related issues, the health, safety, of course, the biodiversity that's feeding the crucial ecosystems. The urban centers dimension is very crucial. There are very much destroyed areas around with hazardous debris, which we will talk in a moment. The agricultural production facilities, not only for Ukraine itself, but it is in fact becoming a global food security issue. The chemical plants, fuel, metallurgical industries, which may have impact even transboundary, looking at the borders and all the rivers that are, for example, reaching the Black Sea, etc. So there's a transboundary component. The waste and treatment facilities, these are all impacting also terrestrial and freshwater systems, and also coastal and marine ecosystems environments. But I mean, looking at this whole picture, even only the initial monitoring work shows that the country and also the region risk being burdened with a legacy, a toxic legacy, long after the conflict ends. Well, just to show you, in fact, the ongoing efforts, because there are so many actors involved in the environmental assessments in Ukraine. OCHA, the UN's Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, is chairing a working group in Ukraine with around 80, 90 members representing more than 50 institutes of UN agencies, governmental, non-governmental organizations, think tanks, individual experts. And it provides also an online hub on diverse information and links to various environmental assessments. So it is, in fact, a good crowd of people. It is quite crowded, but it's a good crowd, bringing many different assessments, many different layers of assessments, in fact, for the use of the whoever is interested, but also as a decision support tool, which requires some level of coordination because it's a bit of widespread, because it is assessment, I mean, it includes assessments from air quality to nuclear risks, from destroyed infrastructure maps to impacted agricultural land or storage facilities. But there is one challenge. Almost all these assessments are carried out by remote sensing techniques, as well as geographically tagging some social media and national media news. So there's a strong need for validation and information and data coming from the ground, which makes, of course, the role of the State Environmental Inspectorate of Ukraine very crucial. They have still a very strong network, but it requires a lot of effort to validate this information for the future use. The Ukrainian government wants to have cases for compensation in the future, for example. Let me quickly take you through the different dimensions of the environmental impacts. One of them being the chemical pollution. The release of toxic industrial chemicals is quite significant. There are at least 7 confirmed incidents of toxic industrial chemicals caused by military activities. And since the beginning of the conflict, oil refineries, the entire oil and gas processing sector has been damaged, which is, of course, bad for the storage, but also creating a lot of pollution problems on soil, on surface water, on groundwater systems. When we look at the waste, it is another huge issue. In fact, all of these items could be presentations on their own, could be term-long courses on their own. When we look at the waste sector, the most important threat is probably linked to the nuclear waste. Just one example is at the beginning of the conflict, Russian Federation took control of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant and other nuclear facilities in the exclusion zone. And the movement of the military vehicles caused dispersion of dust, leading to an increase in background radiation. Additionally, there has been numerous shelling around facilities that deal with radioactive wastes, as well as research facilities which own nuclear fuel assemblies. But perhaps the most recent and the most important one has been the shelling of the big nuclear power plant in Zaporizhzhia, one of the largest in the world and largest in Europe. And UN Secretary General called for international inspectors to be given access to the nuclear power plant and just underline that any attack to such a plant is a suicidal thing. And unfortunately, the risk is still valid. And another dimension of the waste issue is, as I mentioned earlier, the large-scale displacement of people to the Western Ukraine that causes huge waste generation and also lacking fuel does not allow the municipalities to provide waste management services. The other impact is on the urban areas, because we know since the beginning, starting not only on the eastern part, even around Kiev, there has been significant damage to buildings, to municipal infrastructure, railways, airports, administration buildings, educational facilities, and that causes huge debris in the cities and towns, and asbestos is likely to be present in the debris, given the widespread use of the asbestos in building materials since the Soviet times, and infrastructure also in Ukraine, with the estimates of 60% in roofing materials, 60% use of asbestos in roofing materials. That will require quite careful consideration in future assessments in the recovery and also the reconstruction plans. When it comes to, of course, the infrastructure, damaged infrastructure, just the last 10 days, 30% of the power stations of Ukraine has been damaged, and now there are regular power cuts in almost all the cities, including Kiev. Well, one important issue is the food insecurity, because agricultural sector in Ukraine is the main drivers of the national economy, and Ukraine hosts 25% of world's reserves of black soil. Problems in Ukraine have impacts on Sahel, on different parts of Africa. So agricultural land has been affected by three types of damage: physical degradation, pollution by chemical pollution, and affected industries. So these are creating huge problems in Ukraine and also beyond. And also the grain storage facilities have become targets of bombings. Now the grain corridor is open, but it's still not at the levels to export the all restored grain in the country. And finally, the nature is a big victim, I would say, of the conflict in Ukraine. 20% of all nature conservation areas have been affected in the country. Nearly 1 million hectares of protected areas have been impacted, in another word. There are also some reports of deliberate killing of animals, mainly farm animals. And also, as I mentioned, a very unexpected, I would say, impact has been reported deaths of several thousands of dolphins in the Black Sea over 3-4 months' time at the beginning because of the use of the sonars in the naval processes. Well, I have, I think, less than 5 minutes, very quickly looking at what's going to be in the recovery plan. There's an environmental recovery and development plan, which is an integral part of the national recovery plan, with ambitious targets under grouped under these 9 reforms. But in summary, the aim is to build back better and to build back green. And also, as Ukraine is now in the EU accession process, which will take perhaps decades, but still it's another trigger to push the Ukrainian government, and they are willing to do that, for an environmentally sustainable and also climate resilient reconstruction. So what is next? Well, Ukraine is a totally different ballgame because many of the assessments in different parts of conflict-affected states in the world are post-conflict, but this conflict is going on. So there's a need for continuous monitoring of the impacts and hoping and wishing that the war is going to end soon. The recovery and reconstruction plan has to be informed by scientifically solid, comprehensive, multifaceted environmental impact assessments. And these assessments should consider all aspects of physical and social environment, including nature, biodiversity, exposure and public health risks, and complex socioeconomic and demographic factors, because you know, when it comes to reconstruction, things may go on a fast track. Environment could be accepted as something nice to have, but not fully integrated. But we have quite promising discussions with government authorities in Ukraine that they are willing to keep environment as part of their reconstruction, because they know that their economy also fully relies on natural resources linked to agriculture. I will stop here. There are many references that you can use. There are many assessments, but the main thing that we hope is that the war is over and we deal with a post-conflict assessment to feed a proper reconstruction and redevelopment of Ukraine. Thank you very much.